whenever I did finally get to learn what the different settings were, it made so much sense.
Right.
It was just like the clouds parted and the angels sang, and my photography work got so much better. And this was still before I really picked up the videography. So the three major things I think there are to talk about is one. What's good, everyone?
Welcome back to the B&E Project.
Where we're here to help you break and enter into the creative world by discussing the latest tech
and topics of 2019.
Coffee's so good.
It is.
I don't care what. I had a cup of coffee yesterday at like 8 o'clock at night. Yeah.
You went to sleep?
Like, Christina was studying, and I was like, you know what? I want a cup of coffee. She was the same kind of face, like, are you serious right now? And I was like, yeah. Probably should have had decaf, but instead I went straight for the good stuff. And no, I don't have any problem. I can drink a cup of coffee, go right back to sleep. Doesn't bother me one bit.
I can drink tea and fall back to sleep. And you know those weird people that can work out and then go right to sleep?
You're one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no. If I tried to work out, well, I'd have to shower first. But if I'm out doing yard work, especially on a hot summer day, and I come back into the house and you're like, go lay down on the sheets or something, and it's nice and cool because you're so hot from being outside. Like I'll just out like a light.
If I work out, it's over. Play basketball and then eat.
You're done.
It's a wrap.
Starting out as a photographer,
Mm-hmm.
I could have cared less about videoing things at that point in time. And everything that anybody could teach you was keep it on the autos.
Right.
Whenever we got our first DSLR, for those of y'all starting out, it comes with so many settings. You've got 10 different settings on just to start it up, and then you've got 8 buttons on the back, 5 on the top, and we grabbed and we were like, what is this ISO? What is this? We didn't even know what the Q button was.
Yeah.
So it was a big learning curve for us, and whenever we started out with it, we didn't really care to learn. We didn't go out and shit. We just and it was working at the time, and we thought we were doing good. We started out so far, we just did straight JPEG. We didn't even know what RAW was. So it wasn't till probably 2 years ago that we figured out that RAW was better. Yeah. We just thought it was more complicated. So whenever I did finally get to learn what the different settings were, it made so much sense.
Right.
It was just like the clouds parted and the angels sang, and my photography work got so much better. And this was still before I really picked up the videography. So the three major things I think there are to talk about is one, the ISO.
Yeah.
2 is your f-stops.
Yeah.
And 3 is your exposure or shutter speed.
Yeah.
And I just cannot express how much those 3 things will affect your work.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can learn, my number one advice to anybody starting out is that if you can learn those 3 things and how they interact with each other, you will be able to walk into a room and take any kind of photo and it be a really good photo, or know without a shadow of a doubt, like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to capture this photo with what I can do. So that's how I got into the settings.
Yeah.
And we can go into what they actually mean, but thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, even for me, settings, my first experience, I think my first photo shoot, I shot on aperture priority mode. Like, bright sun, things were going everywhere. Didn't know what I was doing. I mean, it was one of those things where I was like, a friend told me, hey, you should just shoot in aperture priority mode, get your f-stop, take it all the way down. I shot at the widest open aperture I had for my first shoot in broad daylight. And I think it's something that seeing that journey, from a little while ago till now, and looking back at it, it's like, man, that could have done so much, in changing. And I think that would have been really key for me, is to know what all the settings are. One of the things, and I'm glad we're talking about this too, is how, it goes into a little bit of composition, and also just how to get a tack sharp image, and the look that you're going for, and what you're going for. And you actually helped a lot. And one of my recent photo shoots, we were talking about things, and you said, this is where I like to shoot. This is the zone that I like to stay in. This is the f-stop that I like to use. Shutter speed, ISO, where you should be at, thinking about grain and things in photos, which is very important. That was huge for me, and I think that's something that's really big when you're starting off in photography, is saying, what the crap are these settings? And isn't it just taking a photo enough? And that's I think one of the biggest misconceptions about people with photography, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's so whenever you upgrade to a DSLR or mirrorless camera, I mean, a lot of people are jumping straight to the mirrorless cameras. They're very scary. Now, I am a DSLR user. All I've ever used are the Canons. And so I have not yet made the jump to mirrorless. I do probably plan on it, that'll be something we talk about later on. But as of right now, what we're doing is just the DSLR mirror cameras.
Right.
Whenever somebody, just to go over quick some of the settings, whenever somebody's looking at the dial up here, starting from one side of the wheel to the other, you're going to see a bunch of letters: C, B, M, AV, TV, P, and then a bunch of other shapes and stuff that you should really never mess with. Like, that's amateur all the way to go to the sunflower and think you're going to take a picture of flowers.
Right.
Unless you're doing video, then there is the video setting. So to go over the different letters, and real quick, if you have your camera, you can look along with it, or you can look at it later, or Google a picture of it, what it looks like. But the C is going to be for custom, in case you want to make your own custom setting. M is going to be manual.
Right.
And I cannot express enough how important it is to learn how to shoot into the manual mode. That gives you complete control of everything that you're doing. So regardless of what we talk about today, learn what those three: ISO, exposure, and f-stop, and shoot in manual, and you will be great.
Yeah.
But moving on, AV is aperture value, which means that you can set what level of aperture that you want to shoot. And that the camera will adjust everything else and keep that aperture at whatever setting you have it on. Next is going to be TV, which is time value. This is pretty good for time lapsing, so you can set the time of your shutter speed to slower or faster, and it'll adjust the f-stop and the ISO according to what your shutter speed is. And then P is portrait mode, which whenever you're taking portraits, it kind of adjusts for that. And all these are pretty much automatics. They have some sort of automation to them, which doesn't give you complete control unless you're in the manual settings.
Yeah, and let's, in talking about manual settings, I mean, so what exactly is ISO? What do you think people need to know about ISO?
So that's a good point. Let's go ahead and explain what the three of those settings are. And since you asked, we'll start with ISO. ISO is artificial lighting.
Right.
So you can think of it like a triangle. And ISO is at the bottom of the triangle. It is the last thing that you ever want to touch, because the more ISO you add to your camera and your image, the more grain you're going to get in your photo and also videos that you record. So always keep that in mind. The lower you can keep your ISO, the less grain you're going to have in it. And moving on from there is your shutter speed or exposure.
Right.
So your shutter speed is going to be how fast your camera takes that picture, how fast that shutter opens and closes to expose the sensor to the image. So whenever you're looking at somebody who's running down the street or who's in a soccer game and you want to catch that still frame of them, about to kick the ball, they're obviously moving pretty fast, so you need a shutter speed that moves really quick. For those of y'all who can't see, I'm making shutter motions with my hands in case you can hear him. So he's kicking the kickball. You're wanting to capture him in a still frame, so you have to do the shutter speed that shuts really quick. So you have to set that up for a quick shutter speed is going to be 1/8,000th of a second, which is super, super, super fast. I can't move that fast, and to watch that shutter move in that camera is really quick. So that means it's gonna have no motion blur, which there's gonna be nothing moving in the photo. Now, if you were to lower that shutter speed down to, let's say, 1/200th of a second,
Right.
now that shutter speed that's still quick, but it's opening just a little slower. So you're going to capture a little motion blur, whether it's the grass moving by, his foot going towards the ball moving, whatever. You're going to start seeing a little blur in the photo. One of the photos that I love doing the most is rivers, waterfalls, anything that's got waves of the ocean. I like a lot of water photography, but any kind of thing that's moving constantly and that's got a bunch of stuff sitting still around it, like a river, you can set your exposure to a high level, like 1 second or 1/10th of a second, where it's opening very slow. And so it's capturing a lot of motion blur, that river, which is moving. So the river looks blurred, but the sides of the riverbank and stuff will still be crisp because they're sitting still. So that explains the exposure. Also, starry nights, to catch those nighttime photos, you're going to have to open your aperture or your exposure to like 10 seconds, 15 seconds. It's going to have to stay open. So, the only reason you do that is because there's obviously no light, and when you're doing night photography, you want to do it on with no moon. You want to be not a full moon, with I guess no moon.
Yeah.
Is that the technical phrase for it? But yeah, so you do it when there's no moon, so that way it's not projecting any light. You obviously don't want to do it in the cities. You get rid of light pollution. You take your camera out into the field somewhere and set it for 10, 15, 20 second exposure. So that exposure will stay open and capture a photo that is 10, 15, 20 seconds long, however long you set it. And that gives plenty of time for the light from those stars to make their way to your sensor in your camera. Therefore, you're producing a nighttime photo. Now, obviously, you do that during the day. It's just going to be so blown out. It's not even going to be funny. And then the last thing on the camera or on the triangle is the f-stops.
Right.
And you're going to hear people talk about that a lot. My lens has an f-stop of blah, 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 blah.
Right.
F-stops is how wide the eye on the lens opens, right? Not the camera body, just on the lens. It's got the eyeball that opens up and shuts. So it's very confusing, but the smaller the f-stop, the lower the number, the wider it opens up on the lens. So if you have an f-stop of, well, let's take this. I've got a 50 mil sitting here in front of me. It's a Canon 50 mil. EF lens, and it's an f-stop of 1.8. You can always see it right on the front of the lens on most lenses, or at least Canons. So this one is a 1.8. So if we in manual setting, turn our f-stop all the way down to 1.8, that lens is going to open up as wide as it can for however long you told it to stay open on the exposure. Right. So if you told it to stay open for 10 seconds, it's going to open up to 1.8 for 10 seconds. Now, I think Canon, these lenses, you can dial them up to 22 f-stop.
Yeah.
So if you dialed up to 22 or dialed down technically to 22 f-stop, that's itty bitty, a little bitty hole that it's going to open up to. So it's going to let through just as little bit of light as possible. And so the reason why it does that is for two reasons. One, to let in a bunch of light. So if you have it at 1.8, it's going to open up very wide. It's going to let a lot of light into that lens so it can make its way to the sensor. So the darker the room, the darker, it's getting outside, the more you want to open that f-stop to capture more light. Or if it's really bright outside, you want to lower that f-stop to 10, 11, so that way it opens less and lets less light in. There we go. A little tongue twister there. So that the other reason. What was the other reason for f-stop? Light and depth of field.
Depth of field. Looking for background blur.
Yes. You wanna take that one away?
Yeah. So a little bit. The lower your f-stop, the more it determines what's in focus and what's not in focus. So let's take the 51.8, or let's take an 85 1.8. The focus, what you can see sometimes on the 50 mil is if you go to 1.8, you have to make sure that your focal points, so if we're talking about Canon dual pixel autofocus or you're in manual, you need to make sure that your focus points, particularly being the eye if you're doing a portrait, let's just say that's what we're talking about right now. If your f-stop is really wide, sometimes you'll blur out possibly like a nose, or you can blur out an ear.
Well, it's the depth of field.
Depth of field from what you're focused on.
Yeah, the eye was in focus, but the back of the ear, since you had it small,
right? It can take those things out of focus. And also, let's say like I did a recent shoot where I had two models. Putting the second person in focus, I couldn't shoot at a very low f-stop because I needed to make sure that the other individual was in focus as well. So those are two very big things that you need to see and watch for. You don't want to get a camera and every time you just shoot at the lowest f-stop, because you need to figure out what you actually want in focus and what you want out of focus. And it tends to be that, and we'll, now we're going to talk about lenses later, but certain lenses have lower f-stops. Certain lenses have higher f-stops. Certain lenses don't zoom. Certain ones do zoom.
And we'll go over all that. Like I said, I think we're going to commit to making a lens video and try to share as much knowledge about that as we can. But I heard you say something, and I wanna touch base on it real quick. You said not to focus on the f-stop.
Right.
And too many times I see new photographers coming up and they hear about this f-stop and how great it is and how it can make the bokeh really nice, and everybody's trying to get the bokeh, however you want. There's a great debate, however you want to say it.
Right.
They're talking about the blur that happens behind the person or the subject that you happen to be filming. So that's what they consider the bokeh, is the blur. So a lot of people, they hear that and they hear that the f-stop creates that it lets in more light. So they hyper focus on the f-stop and they forget about the other two sides of the triangle. And so there are things they could be doing to make their images sharper. And I think this was an issue we found you were running into with your, you were hyper focusing on the f-stop. And you were forgetting about the ISO. Well, your camera would adjust and put it on whatever f-stop you want, but it was going to automatically crank up that ISO. And you, like you said earlier, your ISO was what, 1600?
Oh yeah,
2000.
For some shots, it was
somewhere.
Really bad.
Somewhere in there. So whenever you get that much ISO, again, it's going to create grain in the photo or video.
Right.
So, like I said, it's a triangle, and you can't adjust one side of the triangle without affecting the other. And I think that's one of the most important takeaways to have here, is that That's the reason why I like manual,
Yeah.
because you have full control of all sides of the triangle, and you know exactly what you're affecting on what side of that triangle, whether it's slower speed or bigger aperture, or you want to add a touch more ISO to it.
Oh yeah. And to that point, a couple other things as well. When you're going through adjusting things, like for instance, having a lower shutter speed. Um, if you're shooting at 1/8,000th of a second, you don't need to have a tripod.
Mm-mm.
But like Bailey was talking about, he likes shooting lakes and oceans and rivers and things of that nature. It's actually in nature. But for those shots, if you want to get smooth water, right, you're probably not going to do it handheld, because the jitter from your hand is going to cause those things to shift in appearance. And so making sure that you're in the right element in place for those things as well, and you have the right equipment.
Yep.
And if you're shooting handheld, well, okay, you're fine for certain things. But if you want to get just a really crisp and sharp image all the way through, making sure that you have the right equipment with you as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say for me, and you can speak to this on how you check your settings after, but now I look at my exposure meter, and then I go from everything else. So I go half press on the shutter, see where the exposure meter is. Then I go back and look at my settings and say, okay, now if I start off saying I want a ton of background blur off the bat,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to lower my f-stop all the way to see, how much can I get in. And then after that, one of the things that I think everybody needs to do is play with the lens that you have and see where the sweet spot is.
Yep.
Like the 1.8, the sweet spot is around 2.2.
Yep.
Somewhere in the twos. The 85 1.8 sweet spot's kind of in there for sharpness. So just because you can crank it all the way down doesn't mean that you should.
Yep.
And then see what situation you're in. So if it's nighttime, yeah, 1.8 is probably going to be the best. Or 2.0 or somewhere there. I'm not going to be at a 5 f-stop and I'm shooting in a dark room.
Yep.
So those are things. That's the way that I shoot. I look at the exposure meter first and then go from there. And for Bailey, and I'll let you go on how you look at everything. I know you like shooting just a tad bit below the exposure.
Yeah. So that's my style is, and real quick before I forget, I heard you say go with the kit lens that you have.
Yeah.
And that's a very good point. Each time you buy a DSLR, unless you buy it off of Facebook or something like that where it doesn't come with anything, if you buy one brand new, it's gonna come with some sort of a kit lens, and it depends on what they're running that month, year, whatever, what brand of camera it is, depends on the kit lens it comes with. But usually it's going to be something that's like a, let me see here, what do we got? Like a 28 to 135.
Yeah.
That's usually going to be about the size of your kit lens. It's going to cover a wide range of stuff. So what you want to do is make sure that you can master that kit lens before you go spend a bunch of money on a $1,000 lens that you don't know how to work.
Right.
So, just take your kit lens, take your new body, whatever it is, and make sure you know how to work that properly. Now, mine that I do, I'm like you. I look at the exposure meter or the histogram, and that's a whole nother video.
Oh yeah.
But you look at the histogram or the exposure meter, and I kind of gauge it off that. And I do like mine. If you're looking at the exposure meter, the negative numbers is underexposed and the positive numbers are overexposed, so you got to adjust it for that.
Right.
I like mine just slightly underexposed, just between 1 and 0, and that's because I like to bring it up in post and I like to do my edits that way. But yeah, that's a pretty good. That's a mouthful going through all that.
Oh yeah, and for anyone too. I used to just take random objects and put them on a table,
Mm-hmm.
and shoot that way and figure out what's the way that I like shooting, and messing with all the settings in your camera. And each camera has things that you can customize. I've customized the flash button to my ISO button.
Mm-hmm.
You can go through all of those and figure out, okay, how can I almost shoot with my camera blind? And just, I don't even have to mess with settings. You know, we're talking about DSLRs and mirrorless. Mirrorless, the viewfinder comes up to your eye. I don't have to change where my fingers are, or I'm sorry, I customize where my fingers are, so that way, as I'm looking at the subject, I can change all the settings. And you know, that's something that I think that people need to do. And also, when you get on these photo shoots and things like that, and you're taking photos of people, take your time. You know, better is slow and right than fast and wrong. And so have that confidence of, hey, I'm here for a photo shoot, and quote people the time that you think is reasonable, but then work at your speed to get the best images that you can. And know that each lens that you have, you know, is your best lens, right? Because we've all seen people that have expensive camera gear and they're kind of
I have no idea how to work it.
right? You know, and then you have the people that, you know, might have a cell phone and their composition is just amazing.
Yeah.
So, you know, find confidence in that.
All right. Not that, you know, I think that would be a very good question of the day. For those of y'all who are watching us on YouTube, leave a comment below. Let us know, like, what are your favorite settings? What are the settings that you started out with? What are the settings that you have evolved to? What lens do you like using with those settings? And did this video help you? Were you able to pull something out of this? If y'all go on to Instagram and take photos with these settings and you figure something out, tag us in it. Let us know. My IG handle is ben.bailey. That's BAILEY .85. And Harrison, what's yours?
Yeah, mine's Eaddy.content, EADDY.content.
Good. And then for those of y'all who are listening to us on the podcast station, make sure you go below and rate us and leave a comment for us as well. We're looking for any new suggestions that we can do for upcoming episodes. So did this help? Did it not? What do you want to hear us talk about? And then finally, make sure that y'all subscribe and make sure you hit the like button for us. That really does help. It helps us a lot.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that's it for today.
Yeah.
So we appreciate everybody listening, and until next time.
Yeah. B&E signing out.
Signing out.